Welcome back to another episode of the NABC Guardians of the Game podcast. I'm your host, Tim Doyle, and today we're joined by Texas head coach Shaka Smart. Coach, a lot of people don't know about this, but you could ball back in the day. Now, I've seen assist records. Do you ever tell your squad, I was pretty nice back in the day?
Well, I mean, as you know, it's all relative. So any type of assist numbers or any of that stuff doesn't really matter to those guys because I didn't play anywhere near the level that they play at.
I've seen so many head coaches that when you look back on their bio, I always feel like they led the team in assists as a senior, all-time assist leader. Do point guards make for the best coaches in your eyes?
Well, I think that's the position that most coaches come from, for sure. But, Tim, when you see a big man like a Patrick Ewing or a Juwan Howard, I think those guys have a huge advantage in that, they played a unique position relative to most coaches, and they certainly understand the game from a different perspective. I agree with you. There's a ton of little guys that were probably just okay players, and because we weren't the greatest as players, we got something to prove as coaches.
It's so interesting you brought up a guy like Patrick Ewing. I grew up in New York, so he was the god at the time. I mean, those Knicks teams were oh so close. Couldn't get over that Bulls hump, then couldn't get over that Rockets hump. But you think back to how those teams played, even how he played as such a dominant big. And now we're looking at the game, crazy to think 25 years later, and how much it's changed. In your eyes, Coach, how much has it changed?
Well, it's funny you say that. I happen to be, all of us kind of did some unique things during the spring when we were all stuck at home. So I happened to be watching a Knick playoff game from that exact era that you're talking about. And they literally had Charles Oakley playing the 3 spot. And I was just thinking to myself, man, how much has the game changed? They got Charles Oakley, Anthony Mason, Charles Smith, and Patrick Ewing in the game together. The game's definitely evolved. I still think there's obviously a spot for a dominant big man. Patrick Ewing would be just fine playing now. But I also know that, just the way that offense works and the way the rules are a little bit different, certainly, the guards are probably even more prominent than they were at that point.
Do you think that when you were at VCU playing that Havoc style, maybe you were ahead of your time, going small, being athletic? Because now I feel like everyone's playing like that. Or was that just kind of the style that you wanted to play?
Well, I don't know if we were ahead. A lot of people, I think, caught on right around that time period, 2005 to 2010, somewhere in there, that, if you played a 6'6" guy at the 4 spot that was athletic and, could shoot a little bit and could drive the ball, certainly the benefit far outweighed any disadvantage of him, getting posted up by some guy 6'8" at the power forward spot. And so we would always start with 2 bigs. But then about 2 minutes into the game, we subbed and we played small pretty much the rest of the game. And we did feel like that was a big advantage relative to, teams that had 2 bigs in there most of the time.
Well, you had some crazy success there at VCU. You go to a Final Four in 2011. When you achieve a milestone like that while you're really in the early stages of your coaching career, does that kind of set the bar unbelievably high each and every year?
I think in some ways it does. One thing, Tim, that you realize maybe after the fact is that, we went to the Final Four my second year there at VCU, and you're not really thinking while it's happening how challenging that is, to win 5 straight games in the NCAA tournament and beat the teams that we beat. You're just kind of in the moment and trying to win the next game or be your best in that day. But then after the fact, you realize, man, that's hard to do. And there's a hunger and desire to, try to go, do special things again. And, that's certainly been kind of a driving force for, I think, all of us moving forward since then.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your own personal perspective on maybe a season-long goal. Do you guys talk about that? Like Joel Cornette, God rest his soul, was at Butler when they were just starting to kind of become a national team. And Todd Licklider just talked about winning the game in the tournament. He goes, we're going to go to the Final Four. Now, they never got there while he played, but eventually they did, obviously. So many coaches I talked to, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I really want your personal perspective, but they're always like, let's win today. And I get that. But do you talk to your squads about long-term goals?
Well, I think more importantly, Tim, we try to get them talking about it. We try to get the guys, really sharing and communicating about what they want to do in the short term, in the intermediate term, in the long term over the course of the season. We got together as a team just before we started practice in October. And, we're fortunate to have some older guys on our team that have been around for a little while. And, we talked about kind of what those guys saw coming and what they wanted to accomplish. And one of our players, Courtney Ramey, who's definitely a leader on our team and someone that a lot of guys look to, he said, I want to win Maui. I want us to win that tournament, to go to Asheville and play well and be able to come back with the championship of that tournament. And I thought that was really powerful, just him verbalizing that and saying that. And then the rest of the guys got on board with it. And obviously from there, as coaches, we kind of talk about, okay, here's what goes into that. Here's what we have to do. And that's where the win today stuff comes in, because if it's October 14th, and the game's not till the end of November,
right?
You've got to find a bridge to get to that.
You've had an interesting bridge to your career. You paid your dues, right? I mean, assistant coach, and even though you got an opportunity, you really worked up the food chain. What was the best advice you had, even though you had kind of a meteoric rise? What's the best advice you had along the journey?
Well, Tim, I'm definitely a guy that I don't come from much of a basketball background. No one in my family played basketball. I didn't really know any coaches growing up other than the ones that I had. And I didn't even think about coaching until I was in college. And actually, my college coach kind of put a seed into my head. And then I went and worked as a GA for him. He had moved on to another school. And I'll never forget, about the first month being there, I was at a school called California University of Pennsylvania. I loved it. Division II. Our whole starting lineup was older than me. I was 22 years old. I was, doing all kinds of GA stuff. But when you're in Division II, there's not a big staff. So I also got to do a bunch of assistant coach stuff, like individual workouts and scouting reports and that kind of thing. But somebody gave me some great advice, literally my first month in coaching. They said, make sure that you start to develop and document your own head coaching philosophy. And they said, you can't wait until you become a head coach. You really need to start thinking and writing down what you believe in and what you want your team to look like and act like, and how you want to play and how you want to go about recruiting, how you want to go about scouting and staff and all those things. And that was such simple advice, but also very, very powerful. Because really starting then, I just started writing things down and kind of kept a binder and kept building on top of, some thoughts that I learned from guys I was around or teams that we would play against, coaches that we would scout. And that's definitely advice that I give to any young coach that asks about, working towards becoming a head coach.
And that's pretty amazing, because when I was 25 years old, I was thinking about where we're going at night, and we're going to go grab wings beforehand, and we're going to stay out kind of late, or how are we going to bounce back after a rough night the night before. So you're talking about, this was in your early 20s, mid 20s. You already started thinking long-term about your coaching philosophy.
Well, again, just because I got that advice, and I wish I remembered who told me that, but I don't. And, one thing about me, Tim, I'm pretty good at following directions. So they said, hey, you need to develop and document your head coaching philosophy. I said, okay, that's what I'll start to do. I had no idea if I would even be able to become a head coach. I wanted to at some point, but I knew that there was quite a ladder to climb. I was a GA at Division II. I remember my first Final Four. I ever went to was in Minneapolis. I think it was in 2001. And I went with my boss at the time, Coach Brown, Bill Brown, who's a mentor of mine, great guy. And I didn't know anyone. I remember feeling like a fish out of water, because when you go to the Final Four, there's thousands and thousands of coaches. And in a lot of ways, it's a gathering and a social event of people getting together and going out and hanging out and going to clinics and going to different things. And you stop on a street corner and you see a bunch of guys from different places that you know. I didn't know anyone. And I just remember thinking, wow, like I've got to get to know some people in this business. And I'm glad that I kind of started, from the bottom, if you will, because it gives me an appreciation of anyone that's just getting into the business.
No, I think that's amazing. And I've been at the Final Four, and it's just coaches and men and more men. And there's just seas of men running around the Final Four. That's the thing that always stands out to me. Like, who else got invited to this thing? Because you're right, it's all coaches. Could you give us maybe a tip or a hint into how you started building those networks, those relationships? Because like you said, you go there and you're kind of like, all right, like, do you remember like your first in? Because let's be honest, you had some pretty good assistant coaching jobs and you had some pretty good guys that were mentors to you. What did you start doing to kind of penetrate those circles?
Well, actually, we talk about this a lot, Tim, because we have a coaches group, mentoring group for young Black assistant coaches. And we do Zoom calls and we talk about this exact thing. So one of the things that, again, someone told me to do, and I tell the guys that are part of our group all the time, is you have to aggressively build your network, just the people that you know. Who are the people that you can call, not necessarily to get a job, but even to talk to about maybe a verbal scouting report on an opponent, or to get advice on, how to handle this situation, or maybe to get an evaluation on a recruit from that area, whatever it may be, just friends, contacts, people that you can call. So I definitely, try to give that advice to anyone that's kind of getting going now is, build your network, write it down, put it on your computer, your phone. There's a lot more technology now than there was when I first started, but be very organized with that. And your network should be other coaches, should be administrators if possible, people that you've met at the schools that you've worked at, people at different levels. Basketball is a small world. So, really there's only, maybe a couple degrees of separation, between everybody. So what I did, I'll never forget, I started just kind of an Excel spreadsheet. And I remember I knew two people that were coaching in the Division I level when I first started.
Who were they? Who were they?
A guy by the name of Bill Komar, who's a great guy. He's on Archie Miller's staff at Indiana.
Okay.
He and I are, I don't want to say the only two, but two of the only people that went to a school called Kenyon College that are in, Division I coaching. So he encouraged me. He was at Dayton at the time, and he encouraged me to come work their camp. So I did that. I went and worked their summer camp. So he was one. And then there was an assistant coach at Duquesne, which was just up the road from where I was working at California, Pennsylvania. And that was it. Those are the only guys at the Division I level that I knew. I played Division III. I was coaching Division II. But, as a lot of young coaches have learned and experienced for themselves, it doesn't take long to meet people. And those Final Fours that you talked about, just going and being around people and, interacting with people, whether it's in social settings or at clinics or, whatever it may be, you meet people relatively quickly.
Yeah, you start connecting the dots, right? Even before we came on, I told you I played for Mike Jarvis. I'm sure you have a Mike Jarvis story along the way. And then I played for Bill Carmody, and the Princeton guys all kind of have their own circle. And that's really kind of spread its wings. We're joined here by Texas head coach Shaka Smart. You mentioned the Knick teams. Now, that's near and dear to my heart because I grew up in Queens, so I followed those teams. And I think the Knicks over the last 20 years, well, they've never really had an identity. They've had some talent, right? Carmelo's on the team. They've had Linsanity, but they never really had an identity. Those Knick teams, those old school teams, they had an identity. Your teams have had an identity. Like since day one, you had an identity of how you want to play. How important to a young coach out there is that kind of finding? We talked about philosophy, but your team's played a certain way.
Well, I think actually, Tim, before you even talk about your team's identity, I think it's important for you as a coach to figure out what your identity is. And again, that's something, hopefully guys that are younger in the business are thinking about well before they even get in the position to be a head coach. And it's ever evolving, and it's certainly going to need to fit with where you're coaching. In other words, you mentioned Northwestern. Coach Carmody had a lot of success there because, his identity and the way he wanted to play, the way he wanted to do things probably fit with the type of guys that it made sense to recruit there. For me, when I first went to VCU, I was coming from working for Billy Donovan. And then before that, I'd worked for a great coach named Oliver Purnell at Clemson. And the thing that those two had in common was they both utilized a very aggressive style of play, a lot of pressing, up tempo, trying to really, really get the style of play going fast. And so that was at the front of my mind, having worked for them. I enjoyed coaching guys that like to play that way. Back when I played, I liked to play that way. So it was just kind of natural for me to, try to get our guys to buy into that. And then, again, you got to know your strengths as a coach. My biggest strength is probably just enthusiasm, just having an excitement and a passion for our guys and being out there. So just trying to play to your strengths as a coach and be you.
Now, we talked about, identity on a basketball court. We were lucky enough to be joined by the great Frank Martin, whose identity off the court has changed because the hair is gone. Now, I got to be honest, Coach, I didn't know how to treat that because Frank's kind of scary on the sidelines and I didn't know him like that. So we had to kind of get through the interview to kind of get to that point. I'm not saying you're not intimidating, but the hair is everywhere. I don't want to describe it in a negative or positive way, but what has this transformation been like for you?
It's not been as much of a big deal to me as have made of it. I'm interested. What was the story behind Frank's transformation?
So Frank had COVID and he started to lose his hair in patches. And he said, Tim, when I started, losing my hair, I was one of those guys that said he would point out guys that were thinning and still trying to comb it over and stuff. He'd be like, just come on home. Just shave it. Right. So he said, when I started losing it, I was like, oh man, I got to come on home. He tried to fight it for a little bit with combing it over. And he was like, there just wasn't much there. But when he got COVID, he ended up losing his hair in patches, lost his eyebrows. A lot of alopecia was associated with that. So I tried to handle that lightly because I didn't want to get in we're over video right now. If you're not watching us, I didn't want him to hate me forever. So we ended up having a laugh about it and he was joking about it. But for you, we had Jarrett Grasso, Bryant head coach on, and he goes with the gel look. He said he modeled that after Jay Wright. Now, Jay was at Hofstra when Jarrett and I were growing up together in New York. But I said, what other coach stands out to you hair-wise? He said you. He said, what you've done has changed the game as far as growing it out.
Well, first of all, I'm thinking you mentioned Jarrett, you mentioned Jay. I can think of a couple others. There's something about you New York guys with this slick back, full head of hair. I know you take a lot of pride, Tim, in your hair.
Coach, when I played, we were so bad, we had to market that I was the best hair in the Big Ten. The marketing girl goes, you guys are going to be bad this year. I go, we're not going to be too good. She goes, we got to market something. So yes, it's funny. Is there anyone enough credibility to talk about hair at the college basketball level? Dickie V is obviously famous because he got the bald head. But right after him, I'm going to say that I got some real credibility to talk about people's mops.
For sure. Yeah, for me, it was pretty simple. Everybody went into the stay-at-home back in March. And I actually sent my mom a picture yesterday of myself on the first day of that kind of stay-at-home time. And I completely bald because what I do normally, I cut my hair before the games. So we were supposed to play Texas Tech in the Big 12 tournament. I believe it was March 12th right in there, and
Yep.
the game got canceled because of COVID, like all the other conference tournaments. But I literally had woke up that morning and cut my hair, shaved, got ready for the game, and then about 35 minutes before the game, it got canceled. So I just didn't cut it at all in the spring. Kept it over the summer. Just
Your wife liked it, obviously. She was for it.
well, that's the whole reason I still have my hair, is because my wife and my daughter, it's not even so much that they like it. They just like to make fun of me, and they like to give me a hard time. So they just kind of egged me on to keep it. And, for whatever reason, they kind of, they hold all the power in our house.
No, I had the facial hair with the beard. I think everybody at home was trying to figure something. I think my wife liked the facial hair with a beard because she dimmed her eyes, maybe thought it was another guy. Maybe that's how we spiced it up, Coach. I don't really want to dive too much into my personal life, but let's just say it was a pandemic and everyone was trying to figure it out. You know what I mean?
No doubt.
You've coached several NBA players over your career. What does it mean for you to see your players have success at the highest level?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's turning on the TV and seeing those guys is, I would say that, Tim, and then right up there with that is seeing guys that I worked with become head coaches and seeing them coach their own team. I mean, I just get such a kick out of it because it's like when you've been through a lot, whether it's with a player, and you know how much of a war it is during a guy's freshman year, because guys just don't know what they don't know. Or whether it's with a coach and you've been through, all the twists and turns of, trying to build a program, trying to, win games, trying to navigate challenges. And then you see them accomplish their goal and you see them having success after they leave you, after they go on to, bigger and better things. There's nothing like that. So it's a lot of fun. I try not to compare those guys at all. I just try to be in the moment when I get a chance to watch them play, whether it's guys that have made it to the NBA or, coaches that have been part of our program.
Talk about some of the challenges you've had, good and bad, at your newest spot. You've been there a while now down in Texas. For me, it seems like it was yesterday, but you go down there and it hasn't all been, yellow brick road. Let's be honest. You've had some success. It's been up. It's been around, but I think everyone just expected you. And I got to be honest, so did I, because you were put on this pedestal, which is hard. We talked about going to the Final Four early and trying to get there every year. And now you can kind of look at it. What's the challenges been like down in Texas for you?
Well, you said it, Tim. I've certainly been on both sides of the coin as it relates to, the way that, maybe you're perceived, by people outside of you or in the media or whatever it may be. And it's actually been really good because it's taught me what matters and it's taught me where to put my focus. Nothing against you guys in the media, but it's taught me to, stay away from getting too caught up in that stuff. Because the one thing we tell our players this all the time is if you get caught up in the positive things that people are saying, then it's not possible to ignore the negative. Like you can't really do that. So, yeah, I mean, we've had our share of challenges. Probably the biggest one was Andrew Jones being diagnosed with leukemia, and it's just it puts a different perspective on what you do as a coach. He was a young man who had a terrific freshman year, put his name in the draft, then decided to come back and was leading our team in scoring as a sophomore, really playing well. And it was like, it happened so fast that he was diagnosed and, got really, really sick, lost a bunch of weight, going to see him in the hospital and, just seeing like the helpless feeling that in his eyes, and then feeling that, with not really being able to do anything to help him besides just try to be a support system. That was really, really tough. And I'm so proud of him, just how he's navigated everything and come back and played so well. And, now he's a starter for us and most importantly, he's healthy. So that was tough. We lost a lot of guys early to the NBA. I mean, that's kind of par for the course at this level, as you know. But I've learned a lot just kind of going through that. I've learned that not all one and done players are necessarily created equally as it relates to the way that they impact the game. And I think that's something that I was naive to, before I had coached anyone like that. So it's trying to help those guys understand, hey, obviously we're going to work our butt off to help you become the best you can become. And that's going to happen over a short period of time just because your timetable is a little bit different. But at the same time, you need to pour into your team and do everything you can to make your team win.
Take me under the hood a little bit. I'm just curious because I have two older brothers. My brother Joe played at Sacred Heart when they were Division II. Now he considers his stats Division I. That's a holiday debate, you know what I mean? Because he scored 1,000 points. Like, yeah, those are Division II stats. He considers them now Division I. My older brother played at Iona, but talked about playing at the D3 level, coaching at the D2 level, and then think about all the different types of guys you recruited. I mean, you've really seen every spectrum of it. Well, I don't know if you could answer this question, but was there one type of area where you were recruiting or type of player or school that you were at that you're going to be able to look back on and be like, that was a lot of fun?
Everyone. I mean, every school that I've coached at has been so much fun. I mean, it's funny in coaching, people ask you all the time, well, how do you like living here? How do you like living there? And I mean, I've enjoyed living. I lived in California, Pennsylvania. At the time, I think there was one stoplight in town. I used to eat at Subway every day. I would get at the, how now there's $5 footlongs.
Yeah.
So this is back when there was $4 footlongs. I would get, there was always one that was a special that day. So it was a meatball or turkey.
That hasn't changed, Coach, by the way. I know you may not eat Subway anymore, but that hasn't changed. They still have the different day, different sandwich there.
Nothing against Subway, but I ate there every single day when I was a GA, and I would get a footlong sub. I would eat half of it for lunch, and I would eat half of it for dinner.
Amazing.
So I had Subway coming out of my ears, and I told myself when I got my first full-time job, I'm never eating there again for the rest of my life.
So that's it.
And again, nothing against it because I certainly put in my time there. But no, I've enjoyed everywhere I've been. Somebody should write a book. They should collect recruiting stories from all the different coaches out there, because I'm sure if they could get people to really be honest, I mean, there's so many just ridiculously funny and ironic stories going through the recruiting process with different guys. But, John Wooden said, they asked me why I coach, and I reply, where else would I find such splendid company? And it's so true. I mean, where else could we be around these type of guys? I mean, what other profession? And so it's a lot of fun. It's definitely challenging, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, a couple more questions for you. And my college roommate was Joe Kennedy. His dad was Pat Kennedy, the old Florida State coach, DePaul coach. And he was an assistant coach for Jim Valvano at Iona. And let's not forget, they had some great teams before Jimmy V went down to NC State. So I've seen the coaching circles. I've been around basketball a lot. You're a big part of the NABC board of directors this year and have been involved in a lot of the racial injustices going on, coaching camps. Talk about your role in that, because like I said, you resonate. People know who you are. And when you start looking back at your career, it's like, man, you've actually been around a while.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't get called the young guy anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about not just for our team, but everyone that's part of our program. I want us to be part of trying to make things better. At the same time, and I make this point to anyone that'll listen, there are people that have been on the front lines of this battle for years and years and years that's their full-time job. And those are the folks that, we need to amplify the good things that they're doing first and foremost, and be the wind underneath their wings, whether it's with financial support or any other type of support. the people that do great work in the communities that we're talking about. But I do think as coaches, we certainly can play a role. For me, my favorite thing to do as it relates to this discussion, Tim, is just being part of the mentoring of younger coaches. And that's all coaches, but particularly young African-American coaches. That's why I told you we started a group. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but we call it Black Coach University. And all it is just any assistant coach. And again, anyone that hears this, any Black assistant coach that wants to be part of this, we have a Zoom call that we do. We have a group text that we share. And basically we just want to, provide value for those guys to advance and develop in their career. Whether it's through, helping build connections, whether it's, like I mentioned, helping guys build their head coaching philosophy, or just through relationships. So that's probably my favorite thing, in addition to, just being with our guys, helping them build their awareness of this stuff. Because let's face it, I don't know how you were at 18 to 22 years old, but, I was pretty like head in the sand. These guys are way, way more aware than I was at that time. So just helping them build their consciousness of who they are, who they're around, what communities they come from, what communities they live in currently, and what they can do to be part of helping.
Yeah, last question for you, and it's kind of tied into what you were saying. When we were playing, you and I kind of came up around the same time. I'm not sure the relationship was the same or as close as it is now. Like, I felt like the coach was looked at like you were up here and the players were down here, right? It was almost like now you do it, I don't do it, right? I just get to call the games and sit on the sidelines. You're there day in, day out. You're having the uncomfortable conversations that I've had with my former teammates, with your own kids. Like, they look at you like you're a father figure, but like, talk about the evolution of that coach-player relationship, or do you see it different than me? Because I see it like I held my coaches, like I didn't have that relationship with Mike Jarvis, with a Bill Carmody, that I think you may have with your players.
Well, I think, every coach is different. And I think the point that you're making about the way you looked at your coaches is an excellent point. And I'll tell you, this is probably the number one reason I got into coaching, is that I was raised by a single mom, and I never had a good dad in my life. And I was lucky I did have some good father figures, and some of those guys were coaches. And so I looked at those guys, especially basketball coaches, but even coaches in other sports. But I looked at those guys like they were 10 feet tall. I mean, if they told me you got to run through that wall, I was running through the wall, or trying my best to run through the wall. And so I really made the mistake of thinking that all players look at coaches in that way. And once I got into coaching, particularly once I became a head coach, I guess I paid more attention to it. Once I became a head coach, I realized, wow, most players do not look at coaches the way that I looked at coaches. And that's okay. They may not be looking for the same thing. But certainly the era of the coach saying, hey, my way or the highway, I'm not going to talk to you or see you or spend any time with you other than when we're on the court together, those days are over, or that doesn't work. Maybe there's some coaches that can still do that, but I can't really think of any. There's got to be a relationship there. There's got to be a partnership. The player has to know that you have his best interest in mind, that you understand things about him beyond just, the things that he does on the basketball court. So I think it's still evolving. And I think particularly being a Black coach, certainly there has to be even an added sensitivity to that. And I think the guys, the Konzo Martins, the Leonard Hamiltons, those guys have just done such a phenomenal job of navigating the fact that, hey, in a lot of ways, at times we're coaching guys that, like us, maybe didn't necessarily have the best support or the best figures behind them growing up. Maybe some of them did. But our job is to provide what that player needs, and understanding different players maybe have different needs.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation, and we appreciate you joining the NABC Guardians of the Game podcast. I feel like I'm learning more. Like, when you play for only certain coaches, like I'm starting to learn I'm starting to put my coaching philosophy. So coach, watch out if I get on the sidelines, right? I don't think I'm going to make that transition because I think all you guys have a screw loose and you need to get into coaching. That's why you've had success, but really appreciate your insight. It's been amazing spending time with you. I hope our paths cross sometime soon. I will seek you out at the Final Four and either buy you breakfast or coffee or maybe a late night drink. So thanks so much for joining the NABC Guardians of the Game podcast. Head coach Shaka Smart.
Well, Tim, thanks for having me and keep up the great work.